Last month, I had the pleasure of doing an online panel with one of my favorite people in the world, Guy Sklanders of How to Be a Great GM, and the wonderful Dungeon Dudes duo, Monty and Kelly. And the panel was on things that we wish we knew before running tabletop role-playing games as a Dungeon Master. It was a blast, but I'm pretty sure all of us could have talked about the topic for hours and hours, if not for our time constraints. And when we were done, it got me thinking a bit about a lot of the comments and private messages people send to me about the types of questions I get from newbie dungeon masters when they have the jitters, about the concerns they express to me, nervous about getting behind the screen for the first time. And it's easy to tell from the way a good majority of these questions and how they are framed to me that the DMs have made a lot of assumptions. And that's not a bad thing, but I will tell you that I've heard them repeated enough at this point to understand that there are a few myths out there about running games. So I thought I'd set the record straight with these 13 Dungeon Master myths in hopes of encouraging more people to get behind the screen themselves and let more forever DMs like myself actually have a chance to play for once. Myth number 1 is the biggest and most egregious myth in relation to preventing people from running games themselves, and that's that you need to know all of the rules before you can be a dungeon master. I want to assure you right now, you don't. This is a total myth. Does understanding your system help you as a dungeon master? Absolutely, sure. But you don't have to be a walking encyclopedia before running a game. Instead, focus on the fun, and when rules questions come up, you can either look it up real quick or you can make a call that you think is fair right there on the spot. Just be honest with your group before you start and set the expectations for how you will handle all these situations when they do inevitably pop up. Myth number 2 sort of ties in a bit with myth number 1, and that's why I wanted to include it so early in this video, and that's that you need to be an experienced player before you can be a dungeon master. This, surprisingly to me, is one that I hear all the time, but this is in fact a total myth. There are a great many groups who, when they originally formed, had no one with any experience. The only way any of them were going to play is if someone took the initiative, pun fully intended, and offered to run the game. It doesn't matter how much experience you have as a player. If you are interested in running games yourself, just do it. This goes equally, by the way, for trying out a new role-playing game system. If you think Edge of the Empire or Call of Cthulhu looks like a ton of fun and nobody in your group really has any experience in it yet, don't let that stop you. Offer to run the game for yourself, and if you haven't played it before, that's perfectly okay. Myth number 3 is another big one, and that's that the game is your story. I wanted to talk about this because it's sort of twofold. First off, for newbie DMs that are nervous about writing and plotting out these huge, long campaigns and stories like you're submitting a film script to Warner Brothers for production, I want you to take a deep breath and relax, because the responsibility for creating a great story doesn't fall squarely on the Dungeon Master's shoulders, but is a shared responsibility for the entire table. Conversely, the flip side of that particular coin is that regardless of the incredible story you believe you have for your players, the Tolkien-esque fantasy epic you want to tell them, Dungeons & Dragons is a shared game experience, and your players, not you, ultimately drive the story. Your job is not to talk at them, but to create the world in which they live. The players, not your villain, as incredible and fleshed out as you might believe them to be, that are the star of the show. Simply put, the thought that the campaign is your story, it is a myth. Myth number 4 is that your plots have to be original. This is simply not true. And in fact, more than a few of my fellow DMs and world builders out there will probably back me up here in that you won't be original, even if you try, and that's perfectly okay. Instead of getting stuck on trying to be original, try the opposite and look for story ideas and plot seeds from other works and use those to inspire you. Lean into well-known tropes to give your players a better foundation of recognizable concepts. And don't be afraid to outright steal entire stories if you have to. You don't have to be original to be a great dungeon master. Sometimes inspiration for a great story or campaign can be as simple as taking a Shakespearean play and moving it to the wilds of the African plains. Myth number 5 is one that I wanted to make sure I covered. This myth is that you need to have a bunch of books, or that you need to have your own copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, that you need to have a DM screen and a bunch of miniatures, or that you need to have a premium subscription to a virtual tabletop like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds first. This is so not true. When I started playing and running games with my friends, we were 8 years old, and we certainly didn't have access to a bunch of expensive books or miniatures or maps of the Sword Coast or Greyhawk. We used pencil and paper to draw out grids on a piece of notebook paper, which, by the way, is also what our character sheets were on, because we didn't exactly have a bunch of official printable sheets lying around, or really even a way to download a PDF and print them ourselves back in 1995. Computers just weren't in every household at that point. For miniatures, we used coins and dice, and we would throw down pencils to represent walls so we didn't have to draw out another grid for our dungeon. And we never once batted an eye. Don't let the stuff get in the way of your fun. Now, if you are looking to get behind the screen and you do have a few bucks to spend, I would recommend the following books in this exact order. A Player's Handbook, or PHB, then I'd recommend The Monster Manual, and after that, I would recommend Volo's Guide to Monster. Notice how I didn't even include the Dungeon Master's Guide in that list. That's because you don't need it to start running games. You really just don't. If you're social distancing and looking to run games online, check out this video, which I'll put a link down in the description, as well as Amazon affiliate links for all those books that I just mentioned, to give you an idea of all of the online tools, both paid and free, that you can use to run your games online. Myth number 6 is that you have to act out all of your NPCs and do a bunch of different voices. While it's perfectly acceptable to do these things, it is by no means something you should feel forced to do. I've played in incredible games where my Dungeon Master never even once spoke in first person, so don't let this myth stop you from getting behind the screen. Myth number 7 is that you have to spend hours upon hours prepping for your games. This is a myth that a lot of new Dungeon Masters believe, and it stems from a fear of being underprepared. But the truth is, a large quantity of game prep doesn't always equate to feeling prepared during a game session, regardless of how much prep or belief you have that you know that your game session is going to go this way. Your players are likely to surprise you and often follow a completely different course of actions than you might have even considered in the first place. Simply understanding your setting and being able to adjust to what the players do while having a few plot hooks and possibly even goals for the session will allow you to feel more comfortable behind the screen than trying to memorize every room in a dungeon and every NPC name for your next game session. Personally, I like to prep about 20 minutes before a 3.5-hour game, if that is a campaign that I created, or about 30 minutes if I'm running a pre-written adventure. Some Dungeon Masters prep even less, and many improv everything on the spot. But the bottom line is you don't need to spend hours and hours prepping during the week to be a Dungeon Master. That's a myth. Myth number 8 is one that I think kind of goes hand in hand with number 7, and it's that you need to be amazing at improv. Okay, so this one is the closest on this list today of being true on some level, but it is still a myth, and I'll explain why. It's not a myth that at some base level, you will improvise some things when you run a game. However, what makes this a myth is the high gradation and degree to which people believe you must be capable of improv in order to run games yourself. A great tip for newer Dungeon Masters that might struggle a bit in the moment when they have to describe another room or generate a new tavern in a new town right on the spot is to simply involve the players in the process. This is a great tool, and not only does it alleviate some of the pressure off yourself, but when you do this, players take on more ownership of the world, and it can help ignite their imagination and immersion as well. When your players ask to locate a tavern to relax in your next town, simply look to them and say, "You are directed to a tavern at the end of the road with an old hanging sign that reads, Taylor, what's the name of this tavern? It's called the Fire Ferret Inn. And Brando, what is its signature dish? They serve roasted boar. And Shay, when you walk inside, what's the first thing about this tavern that stands out to newcomers?" And so on. While it's true, I have said many times before that there are no great Dungeon Masters that are not good at improv, the myth that you have to be a master at improv in order to run a really great campaign or game for your friends is simply not true. Myth number 9 is that if you make a mistake, you'll end up killing all of your players' characters. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, at least, it's actually a lot harder to kill your PCs than you might think, certainly once they are past the first 2 levels. While this won't be true for every tabletop role-playing game system out there in the whole wide world, most of the popular games you will come across will have had some form of pretty extensive playtesting. It's the game designer's job to make sure that if they say this monster or this trap are an appropriate level for these level characters, usually, though not always, certainly not always, they are pretty close to being accurate. Also, don't stress out too much about making a mistake and accidentally killing your PCs, even if you do find yourself in a tight spot where you feel like the dice aren't going well for your group. While I never fudge or cheat the dice personally, either for or against the players, it is perfectly acceptable for a new Dungeon Master to protect your players from behind the screen and simply say that your monster misses an attack that might kill a PC. It's literally what the screen is there for. However, 2 quick points on that. First off, never tell them that you did that. It will ruin the experience for them. And secondly, never cheat against your players, aka prolong a fight or protect your monster and say that it saved when it didn't make the roll. The screen is there to help prevent Dungeon Master mistakes. And that's why this is a myth, because you have multiple safety nets with challenge ratings and a really great DM screen. Myth number 10 is probably my favorite myth for running games, and it's that you need to start your campaign at level 1. Simply put, you don't. Now, I love starting my campaigns at level 1, and I typically move pretty quickly with leveling up my players, my current Icewind Dale campaign excluded, as I am back onto handing out experience points, but you can start not just a one-shot, but an entire campaign at level 15 if you wanted to. There's nothing in the rules that say you have to start at level 1. I checked for you guys, I promise, it's not in there. Myth number 11 is one that drives me probably the craziest out of everything on the list, and it's that real campaigns go all the way from level 1 to level 20. That, in essence, a campaign that doesn't go from 1 to 20 is in some way inferior or less satisfying for the group. I genuinely hope we can work as a community to just put this one to bed. The amount of pressure a Dungeon Master puts on themselves to try to go from level 1 to level 20 in a single campaign before they've even had a single session is really nothing more than an oppressive burden. And I've had enough one-on-one coaching sessions with patrons to know that there are still plenty of experienced DMs even that really give a lot of credence to this myth. But please hear me out today. This is simply not true, and in fact, in my opinion, a campaign that tries to go from 1 to 20 right from the jump is probably going to feel a little forced and railroady to the group as the Dungeon Master tries desperately to bridge one huge overarching story from the first level to that last one. Even if we looked at the first true epic modern fantasy, The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship doesn't all start at level 1, nor could it be argued that they all end at 20. Sure, Frodo and Sam might have been level 1 adventurers, but they end probably somewhere around 4th level in their skill sets, while Boromir, Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas all start off their adventure much higher with extra attack already, and they probably end around level 13 characters. And Gandalf, I mean, he was basically an angel, or an Istari in Tolkien's world, so it would probably be more appropriate to give him a CR instead of traditional player level, so I'd give him somewhere about like a CR 15, 16 or so if I had to. I mean, he did take on a Baelor, so that's pretty close, I think. All of this ridiculous and bloated analogy is, of course, just for fun, because I really just wanted to see how many people would argue with me down in the comment section, but I do hope it gets my point across. Campaigns don't have to be a 1 to 20 affair, and it's perfectly okay and even reasonable to run a shorter campaign from 9 to 15 if you wanted. A 3-level arc from 5 to 7 where the players take on a Pasha from Kalimshan actually sounds like a lot of fun. Myth number 12 is that your game should be played every week. I have earnestly really wanted to get this into a video for some time now, and this is finally a great opportunity for me to do so. Simply put, you do not have to meet every week to play in a good campaign. In fact, I would recommend against it. Instead of meeting every week and burning yourselves out, or meeting every other week and slowly losing interest after a few slogs of a session, I cannot say enough good things about a 3-week on, 1 week off schedule. Now, obviously, you don't have to follow this advice. The point is that you don't have to meet every week and shouldn't feel like you are forced to. But with that said, I personally have moved to a first 3 weeks of the month with the last week off, and it has done wonders for eliminating schedule conflicts in my games. I no longer have cancellations or last minute texts where multiple players suddenly have something that's come up. By giving players that day well in advance, when and if they do have something that might conflict with a game time, they tend to move it to one of those off days. It still feels like we're playing regularly, but just knowing that we have that little bit of scheduled time off alleviates a lot of the pressure from feeling like every single Tuesday or Wednesday or Saturday nights or whatever day your group plays on is booked up and blocked off forever and ever and ever. Also, it's great for the family life with the wife as well. It's an easy schedule to remember, and if there's something that my wife wants to plan, she knows well ahead of time that the last week of the month, I don't have any games to play. Give it a shot and thank me later. And finally, myth number 13 is that if something goes wrong, your players won't have fun. All I'll say to this is that it's not true. And if you think that if you prep enough and learn a game enough and draw out all your maps ahead of time in order to run the perfect game, that you can just do all those things, your game will be perfect, that it has to be perfect. Let me just say, it's not going to be perfect. Something is going to go wrong. You're going to make an incorrect ruling. You might kill a PC or forget a monster has an ability or how their legendary actions work. But none of that is going to matter to your players. They're there to have fun, and I promise they want you to do well. They want to have a good time. Just remember that, and everything will be fine. Okay, adventurers, so what are some of the myths out there about being a dungeon master that I missed? I think I got most of them. I think I got all of them, but I'm pretty sure there might be maybe one or two out there floating around that might have got left off this list. So let me know which ones I missed down below. I just wanted to take a moment and thank all of my incredible, amazing, wonderful patrons over at welcomeadventures.com for all the incredible support you guys give me. If you guys like what I do here, you want to support more content like this, welcomeadventures.com is a great way to support the channel and pick up some extra swag for yourself, like this map. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, or you're learning to love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more just like this. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below and come join us. Also, on a personal note, I didn't know if I was going to include this in the video, and I still might cut it. I don't know. I'll go back and look at it while I'm editing. But look, I know that content has been a little bit slower as of late. That's just because there's been a lot of personal health issues with my pops and his cancer. He has been officially declared terminal. And it's one of those things where just a decision kind of was made that I wanted to put energy in other places because, you know, time is precious. And so I just wanted to say thank you. This isn't a sad, soppy, awful, feel bad for Cody thing. I just wanted to tell you that, look, you know, times are hard for a lot of people out there. And I am very blessed that you guys are so fucking incredibly supportive, okay? I don't even care. Demonetize the video. Just thank y'all so much for all of your support. It matters to me. It matters to my wife. It matters to my family. And so thank you for all the support. Knowing that you guys will still be here, even if maybe videos don't come out every single week like a lot of other channels do, it means the absolute world to me, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.